Hi, everyone. Deserie Foley here, and I'm with my co-host Ben Chasteen. Say hi, Ben.
Hey guys, how you doing? Good to see
Hey, and we're
everybody.
yeah, we're here today to interview a very close friend of mine, Jesse Beltran. Hi, Jesse. How you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Good, good, Jesse. Can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, obviously you know my name. I'm Jesse Beltran. I'm a retired Sacramento City firefighter paramedic out of the city of Sacramento in California. Um, my background is I was the former president of an organization called the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies. I am currently a certified master hypnotist with my diploma in hypnotherapy, and I was formerly the owner of an ISP in the state of California in the late 90s, in which we were instrumental before high-speed data was around in using direct line of sight microwave technology to give corporations high-speed data. Currently, I am the president of Cosmic Clarity Connections. And what we do is we put together seminars and retreats to educate the general public about topics that are basically not covered by mainstream media today and until recently. And where my story begins is back in 2009, 2010, I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Hall. He's the author of two books. The first one is A New Breed, Satellite Terrorism in America. And the second one is called Guinea Pigs, Technologies of Control, in which he writes about my efforts that I've done across the United States, which eventually took me around the world. And what that topic was pertaining to was that I was at a conference and I met Dr. Hall, and we got on the topic that he was seeing individuals who were complaining about unusual symptoms. And what was most disturbing is they said that they were hearing these strange acute onset of sounds that were reverberating through their head, followed by short-term, long-term memory loss, brain fog, and what they would describe as vibrations through their body, which is more defined as electrical shocks. Recently, the Department of Homeland Security on May 8th of 2024 held a hearing with regard to this phenomenon. And the reason they held a hearing is because they were having complaints from diplomats, our U.S. diplomats in Havana, Cuba in 2016. And their complaints were very similar to what Dr. Hall was talking about, acute onset of strange sounds in their head. And followed by short-term, long-term memory loss, and acute on, and then these electrical shocks to the extremities, and that was followed by Colonel Greg Edgreen giving testimony at the Department of Homeland Security's hearing, saying that this phenomenon is very real. And it is happening in our homeland. Not only is it happening to our U.S. diplomats, it's happening to our best of the best in the CIA, the best of the best in the FBI, and now it is happening to congressional members. The only shortfall is that when they were asked if this was happening to civilians, none of the witnesses would directly answer that question. They deferred that they only analyzed federal employee cases and their family members, which inadvertently means that their family members are U.S. citizens and civilians. And so therefore, that means that it is happening to civilians. So let's go back to 2010 when we're talking about Dr. Hall. I
Jesse,
asked him,
sorry,
yes.
before you go to that, when you were saying that they were looking at, the family members, was there any conclusions or did they come to any conclusions with those reports? Did they find that their family members were also affected, or did they comment, or was it the report inconclusive?
No, I actually know firsthand, straight from the horse's mouth. About 3 months ago, I had a head doctor of a three-letter agency contact me about our work. And he is currently treating 338 federal employees, and some of those being their family members.
Wow. So because
Yes.
those family, like for example, what happened with Cuba, there was a lot of these officials that were saying they were getting sick, and that's why they call it the Havana Syndrome. But then if you're saying that it's also affecting their family members who weren't in Cuba, correct? So then the question
Uh,
is how,
yeah, in some cases they were, in some cases they weren't. Yeah,
yeah. So how are the
yeah.
ones that were, and this is kind of more of a rhetorical question here, but it's like, were the family members that didn't go to Cuba have these symptoms if they weren't even there to begin with? So I don't know. It's
Correct.
just a weird, it's an interesting question, right?
Yeah, yeah, but we're going to answer, I'm going to answer that question for you.
Right. I figured you
So
would. So yeah.
going back to 2010, with Dr. Hall, I asked, he said, he figured if they were hearing the signal, we must have some way to detect it. And so he was doing what was called a preliminary, what we now call a preliminary RF scan. Basically, he used the same methodology that a very famous private investigator by the name of Melinda Kidder, who was involved in the Iran-Contra investigations. She uses these exact same types of devices. And one of them was a JM20 Pro RF detector, and he was doing testing around their person, and they were coming up positive at very specific focal areas around the human body. And so I said, well, isn't that proof enough to send them to their doctors and at least get help? And he said, no, what was happening back then is that they were being railroaded into the mental health industry and then forced medicated and being further victimized. And so I said, well, there's got to be some way to gather this data and make it tangible. So I decided to create, at that time, the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies with the help of a couple other gentlemen. At the time, it was Lars Dugard and a gentleman by the name of Peter Rosenhall. So I wanted to see just how many people were out there having these symptoms. And so I held a meeting in Sacramento, California. And to my surprise, because I only expected maybe a handful, maybe six to 10 people, 100 people showed up at that first meeting, all complaining of the exact same complaints with very, very little deviation. So I knew we were onto something. And so I just said, okay, now we're going to do this RF testing on a mass scale, which would include surveys so that we can gather statistical data. And we held our first meeting in Davis, California. And to our surprise, 300 people showed up to that meeting. And what the data began to show is that the people who were most prevalent to suffer from this were Caucasian females in their 40s, recently single, widowed, or divorced. And there's a reason for that, and I'll get into that later. Followed by African American females, African American males, Asians, Hispanics, and it dwindled down in ethnicity from there. We went to the Midwest with the exact same statistical results. And then it flipped a little bit when we got into Chicago. The African American criteria and Caucasian criteria flipped. And that stayed consistent all the way to the East Coast, with one exception, and that was in Virginia, which we were recently at. And a group of individuals found out what I was doing and asked me to come do testing there. And these were all military subcontractors, all expressing these exact same complaints. Now, Colonel Edgreen says that this phenomenon is real, and it is designed as a slow kill. It's very methodically meant to make a person feel like they're crazy. And this is what they labeled as the Havana Syndrome, or anomalous health incidences is now what the technical term that they're referring it to. And my journey not only took me across the United States, but I was invited by a European government to come and test their US diplomats and family members. And they asked me to bring along anyone who I felt most definitely was a victim of this phenomenon. And what they allowed me to use is a research facility I had to sign an NDA, but it was called an anechoic chamber, and it was these things are millions and millions of dollars. And so I jumped at the opportunity because this was rated to block out frequencies between 9 kilohertz and 18 gigahertz. We knew that the frequencies that we were detecting were well within this. And our suspicion was a little different than what the government is portraying. They're saying that this is caused by a directed energy weapon. So this means that someone has to be aiming a beam at you, and so that you would have these symptoms. But the problem was a lot of these diplomats were saying that they were getting this in their vehicles, in their homes, in a restaurant, no matter where they went. So our theory was, based on the data that we were collecting, because the victims in the United States were saying they couldn't escape it. And we even took some of them down into deep granite caverns, miles down into the earth, where there were no frequencies for cell phone transmission, radio transmission, or anything. And even down into the earth, we were detecting these frequencies. So this led us to have a theory that there's something special about these individuals that allows them to receive the signal. And our theory was that it had to be internally within them. And so when we went to Europe and we tested everyone, we used control groups, those who weren't complaining of these symptoms, and they were getting a frequency readings of 0. But when we put in those who were symptomatic, we were detecting frequencies in those exact areas that they tested positive in the preliminary RF scans that we were doing across the United States. Now, the reason I became a master hypnotist was because I noticed that those who were most affected, we're talking, I had doctors losing $1 million businesses because they were just going and telling everyone what they're experiencing. And when you start saying you're hearing strange sounds, you're going to be diagnosed with a mental disorder, and then you're not going to be allowed to touch patients anymore. So this is what was happening. And so what we decided to do is get them in that anechoic chamber. And when we were detecting those frequencies, it was at that point that we can conclude that for whatever reason, that there were anomalous signals being emitted from their person. And that was very exciting for us, because then it allowed us to go to the next step. And the next step was, and I'm going to share this with everyone, is what we were finding. And I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see my screen here.
We could see it. Well, we can see it, but there's nothing there yet. Oh, there it is.
Okay. And this is going to be one of our earliest clients. And this is, now I can disclose her name because she has been on redactions for many, many years. We haven't disclosed her name, but this gal's name is Bonnie Kellerby. And what we were pulling out is, this is a photo micrographic report on 3 specimens that were removed from her person at areas where she came up positive on a preliminary RF scan. And there was a chain of custody. And what this report speaks of, these were foreign body specimens made of advanced materials. And those advanced materials happen to be made of microelectronics approaching the nano size. And this is what they look like. I'll show you here.
Wow. This
is a nano wire. This is the actual implant, and our bodies do not reject them. And they come in various shapes and sizes. And here is another one that was removed from her.
Jesse, what would be this, like, how, is there anything you can compare this to, like a size? I mean, like, you know, like, for example, if you take like a grain of rice, is this smaller than a grain of rice, roughly around the same
These
size?
were smaller than a grain of rice, but I'm going to show you the size of these things back in I'll get to that. This is actually an MRI scan, and this is an RFID chip that you can clearly see. The cylinder here, you actually can see the coil that's made within that. So this is another person that is suffering from this phenomena. And This is the one I want to show everyone because you were asking about size.
Yes.
And this is, let me see if I can enlarge this a little bit for you. This is the Dave Larson case. He was a politician out of Southern California who fell victim to this phenomenon. And you can see here clearly that this is 2 letters on a penny. This is actually an implant that was pulled out in late 90s. They come in various sizes. This one's like 4 or 5
late
letters on a penny.
90s?
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes, the late 90s. He had
That's
over
crazy.
10 of these removed from his person. And you can do the research. You can look up the Dave Larson report. All the chain of custody was done there, and he had a bunch of these. And what these do is they transmit telemetry, medical telemetry data, so live data about what your body's doing, like things like heart rate, metabolism, breathing, cellular metabolism, blood sugars, all kinds of data about your person. This is the technology that's here and now. The other thing, go ahead.
Let me ask you a real quick question. How or who, I mean, I'm sure you're going to get to this, but who and how is this getting into people's bodies? Like, who's putting them in there?
Okay, so in the Larson case, these were injected in him with a needle. He sued and he lost. And the reason he lost, the judge threw it out because he unknowingly signed up to be in an experiment.
Oh my
And
gosh.
the problem is that they did not give him full disclosure. And any lack thereof of full disclosure is deception. And because I know if he was fully informed that he would never have done this. Here's another case. No. And here's another case. This is the Bob Boyce case. Bob Boyce case was he was an inventor, and I was on the phone with him. And he said to me that he thought he was going to die. He was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And he was an inventor of a high efficiency engine. And he was one day he was at work in a Faraday cage, which is a smaller version of the anechoic chamber that we use in Europe. And he used the same type of frequency detectors that we use, and it pinged when it accidentally went by his shoulder. So we thought it was odd when it got an x-ray, and lo and behold, in the x-ray, they found this implant in one of the tumors. This is the cancerous tumor. If you look down here at the tweezers, this is your traditional RFID chips. And this is size of a large grain of rice.
So that was inside of the tumor.
This was inside of the tumor.
Wow.
Do you think that's what caused the tumor?
Bob believes that it is what causes the tumor. And back then, there were a lot of cases that showed that there was an increase in cancers if you had this in you. And that there was a study done on animals, dogs, cats. And they were finding higher incidences of these cancerous tumors in the animals back then. So it's not a far-fetched conclusion to say that this RFID chip is what caused Bob's cancer. So he had the surgery done. They removed it. It went to pathology. And I asked him, I go, Bob, well, where's the implant? Because my curiosity is that I know that you can get a serial number off of these. And he said it disappeared. And I said, well, that's not surprising. But he was happy enough that his cancer had subsided. And so, he felt that he was going to live. But it came back very aggressively. So he immediately got back into the Faraday cage and rescanned his person. And he found a second chip. And this time they used chain of custody. And they removed it. And the electronic serial number was traced back to an NSA database. Interestingly enough, his business partner, he explained to me, one day Bob was at his office and he loves Mountain Dew, and his business partner brought him a Mountain Dew. And then strangely enough, Bob woke up 3 days later in his office, not knowing what had happened. And his partner was a former NSA employee. So he strongly believes that it was his business partner who did this to him. And that's, yeah. So where we're at today is with this Havana Syndrome, is that we are now we have cases that are working their way up to the court system in which these implants have been pulled out of other cases, which we have did an RF scan on. And one of these cases happens to be on the East Coast. And it's working its way up through the system. Most of the time, these court cases get thrown out because people position this as a civil rights violation. And for whatever strange reason, they're being thrown out. They took a different approach on this court case and approached it as a personal injury, because now we have the smoking gun, we have the bullet. And that's really what needed to be obtained, because everything else is really subjective. As Colonel Edgreen said, this is made to make a person look like they're crazy and feel like they're crazy, because there's no way to prove it in traditional medicine. These things are now at this. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a real quick question here. What do you think this technology does other than send back feedback for medical telemetry? Like what else do you think that it does? Like I know some people, claim that, they have these like memories that are so far-fetched. Do you think that they're able to like put in false memories, or can you kind of like talk about that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And interestingly enough, there's a couple of classified reports that have been declassified. And one of them is this report here. So this is a report from the around early 70s. And this is titled Individual Rights and the Federal Role in Behavior Modification, a study prepared by the staff of the Subcommittee of Constitutional Rights of the Committee on the Judiciary, United States Senate, 93rd Congress, second session, November of 1974. Now, I'm going to go to a highlighted area. And basically, this was all about mind control and behavior modification. And unfortunately, the United States is known to experiments on its own. The Deserie experiments, the nuclear exposure to radiation, the LSD experiments.
Oh yeah, the LSD. Yeah, I mean that the CIA came out and had to actually apologize for the experiments that they were doing, and unknowingly on people. So
yeah, and if you go back to Ewan Cameron, who was a Canadian psychiatrist, and that lawsuit is still going on today, where he was paid by the U.S. government to experiment on adults to see whether or not you can erase their memories and re-imprint new memories. And he would do things like electrical shock therapy, induced sleep through drug induction, and he would do a thing called, in its infancy, psychic driving. And psychic driving, he would put a helmet over their head, and he would play themes over and over and over again with the tape recorder. And he really messed people up. So where did all this come from? Today, we basically have this on steroids, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but I'm going to read something to you. Now, this is that document by our federal government in the 70s. It says, within our electrophysiological laboratories, we presently have the capability of programming a wide weight of audiovisual stimuli with current recordings of heart rate, both directly and in beats per minute, galvanic skin responses, changes, electromyographic responses, and alpha and beta brainwaves. We presently are in the process of developing portable biofeedback devices which can be used for self-monitoring. The planned use of a number of satellite facilities outside of UCLA, notably at Atascadero, Camarillo, and Vacaville state hospitals, raised additional questions of control, and it made it more difficult to monitor carefully the activities of the CSRB. Moreover, Vacaville and Atascadero were state facilities that had attracted substantial notoriety for allegedly unethical procedures over the past several years. Moreover, among the principal figures involved in the formulation of plans for the center were a number of controversial researchers in the field of behavioral control technology. notably several psychosurgeons and proponents of electrophysiological methods of behavior control. One was a researcher who had conducted substantial research into methods of electronic control of human behavior. And here's where it gets interesting. Now, this was the early 70s, including the use of radio transmitter receivers to determine the location, activities, and even thoughts of the individual using the device. And that's pretty profound, because I don't even think anyone would have fathomed that we had this technology in the early 70s. And now what we're dealing with is even more robust. And what I'm going to read next is the New World Vistas report. Now, this is a declassified document by our United States Air Force that was created by the best of our best minds in the military to keep the United States Air Force a superpower 50 years into the future. And this was obtained in 1995, but it was released in November of 1994. And this is the Defense Technical Information Center. And again, titled New World Vistas, Air and Space Power for the 21st Century.
Wow.
And I'm going to just read the highlight. So this is a 225-page report, but this is page 89. And I'm specifically going to this because it addresses exactly how this was pre-planned. This is titled Biological Processes Control. And it appears likely that there are a number of physical agents that might actively but largely benignly interact or interfere with biological processes in an adversary in a manner that will provide our armed forces the tools to control these adversaries without extensive loss of life or property. These physical agents could include acoustic fields, optical fields, electromagnetic fields, and combinations thereof. This paper will address only the prospect of physical regulation of biological processes using electromagnetic fields. Prior to the mid-21st century, there will be a virtual explosion of knowledge in the field of neuroscience. We will have achieved a clear understanding of how the human brain works, how it really controls the various functions of the body, and how it can be manipulated both positively and negatively. One can envision the development of electromagnetic energy sources, the output of which can be pulsed, shaped, and focused, that can couple with the human body in a fashion that will allow one to prevent voluntary muscular movements, control emotions and thus actions, produce sleep, transmit suggestions, interfere with both short-term and long-term memories, produce an experience set, and delete an experience set. This will open the door for the development of some novel capabilities that can be used in armed conflict, in terrorist hostage situations, and in training. New weapons that offer the opportunity of control of an adversary without resorting to a lethal solution or to the collateral casualties can be developed around this concept. This would offer significant improvements in the capabilities of our special operations forces. Initial experimentation should be focused on the interaction of electromagnetic energy and the neuromuscular junctions involved in voluntary muscle control. It would appear...
Jesse,
yes, go ahead.
Could you explain that in like layman's terms, what that means for everybody, what you just read?
Yeah. Yes. Let me read this last paragraph and I'll just bring it all into layman's terms in a brief synopsis. And it says, this last paragraph is really important because this is where we're at. Mm-hmm. It says it would also appear possible to create high fidelity speech in the human body. Remember, a lot of these people are hearing voices. Mm-hmm. Raising the possibility of covert suggestion and psychological direction. When a high-power microwave pulse in the gigahertz range strikes the human body, a very small temperature perturbation occurs. This is associated with a sudden expansion of the slightly heated tissues. This expansion is fast enough to produce an acoustic wave. If a pulse stream is used, it should be possible to create an internal acoustic field in the 5 to 15 kilohertz range, which is audible. Thus, it may be possible to talk to the selected adversaries in a fashion that would be most disturbing to them. In comparison, the discussion in this paragraph above, the concept of imprinting an experience set is highly speculative, but nonetheless highly exciting. Modern electromagnetic scattering theory raises the prospect of ultra-short pulse scattering through the human brain that can result in reflective signals that can be used to construct a reliable estimate of degree of the central nervous system arousal. The concept behind the EEG, remote scattering off of action potentials or ensembles of action potentials in major central nervous system tracts, assuming we will understand how our skills are imprinted and recalled. It might be possible to take this concept one step further and duplicate an experience set in another individual. So what are we saying here? Basically, they're saying that they can affect your memory. They can imprint memory sets. Now, as a hypnotherapist, let's take this technology away. Just utilizing language. 30% of the population is highly suggestible, according to statistics. Now, you put this in someone who's highly suggestible, you can essentially have a remote human. You can imprint memory sets, take a memory set from another person and put it in them, and they would not know the difference that they did not experience it themselves. It would be virtually impossible to convince them. And so this is what we're saying. They have been, and what does this mean? This is mass manipulation on a global scale. Colonel Edgreen testified that this is happening on every continent with the exception of Antarctica. So 2 cases that come to mind, the Myron May case. He was a United States soldier who called me 1 week before he did a horrible atrocity. He called me complaining about these exact same symptoms. And I expressed to him that this is a long road to toe. It's not going to be a quick fix. There are some certain steps that we need to do in order to get to proving what he's experiencing. He didn't want to wait. When this happens to someone, it's either fight or flight in the beginning. And he was a soldier, so he's in fight mode. And he went and killed 16 people on the East Coast at the Navy Yard. That was a Navy Yard shooting. There's another case, the Myron May case. He was an attorney out of Florida. He called me, and he was expressing these complaints. And I said, well, again, as I expressed to Myron Aaron Alexis, I'm sorry. Aaron Alexis was the soldier.
I was going to say,
Aaron Alexis was a soldier.
Mm-hmm.
Myron May was the attorney. And now Myron May called me and again expressed these same complaints as Aaron did. And his exact words to me, because I told him this is going to be a slow process. He says, I ain't got time for this. I got bigger fish to fry. And he went and he killed people at the research lab there. So I just want to clarify. Aaron Alexis was a soldier that killed the 16 people in the Navy Yard shooting, and Myron May was an attorney out of Florida that killed people at the university there in the research lab.
And what did Alex have on his gun?
He wrote, Aaron Alexis wrote, "This is my ELF weapon" in the butt of his gun. So basically, he was having this frequency emitted to him. And this is what we're dealing with today. We're dealing with a system that is basically out of control. Technology has outpaced our laws, and I don't think our forefathers ever fathomed that we would have this type of technology. Now, it is my sense that in early 2010, when we started doing this study, all the way to 2015, the United States was in its experimental phase. But President Putin said, and he gave an interview in the Politico, and he said, the first superpower to master psychotronic weapons will be the superpower to rule the world. Mm-hmm. And it is my strong belief that today, that is what we're dealing with. The United States has this technology. Russia has this technology, and they were probably more advanced than us. China has this technology, and the UK has this technology, and we believe India does. Now, I think we've been hacked. it makes no sense that we would go after the best of our best in the CIA and the FBI, our most talented U.S. diplomats, and now going after our U.S. congressional members. And this is where we're at today.
Yeah, and Jesse, can you talk a little bit about, I know that you were talking, in some of your other videos about a special ops soldier, what frequencies was coming up with him? Because
Yeah. So, yeah, recently, uh, we had a special ops soldier who was complaining about having an unusual experience. And so I said, what the heck? Well, why don't we just do an RF scan on you, a preliminary RF scan? And to my surprise, he came up positive. And so I advised that he needed to get what is called a nonlinear junction scan. So our process tests for active frequencies. Now, there's things as active technology and passive. And what the nonlinear junction scan does, it will test for passive technology. That means, for example, an implant that is not firing off 24/7. And what it'll do is it'll scan to see if there's ferrous material. And if there's ferrous material, it sends out a first harmonic to test for the ferrous material. And if it is, it'll get a reflection back and send out a second harmonic, which will turn it on. And then a third harmonic that will get a frequency from it. And that's what we had him do. And to our surprise, he came up positive in 6 locations. But what's most interesting about his case is the frequency that was detected. It was a frequency that we hadn't seen in the last 15, 20 years that we've been doing this. And when we went to see who owned that frequency, I expected it to be the United States military. But to our surprise, it wasn't. And that was even more disturbing. And when we figured out who owned it, and it actually came back that NATO owned the leasing rights on that frequency.
Wow.
So what does that mean? The question is, why does NATO have the rights to a frequency that we're finding on a special ops soldier? It gets you thinking, was this agenda, this one world order or new world order agenda, really, and it's being implemented? Are we in the midst of it? And based on everything that had been happening up until recently, it definitely looks like it. And my suspicion with the change of this new administration, all we've done is slowed it down, but they're not going to stop.
Dude,
wow,
yeah.
had been.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, all of this is just like mind blowing, right? I mean, there's so many things that we can go from this direction. Like, one, I'm sure a lot of people are worried about themselves to see if, if they have in this, what can they do? The other question, I want to backtrack on something you said, and I'm not sure if I had this right. It was like Verde chamber or something. Like, you mentioned it a couple times, and I'm
Iconic
not,
chamber.
yeah, I'm not really sure what that is.
So the anechoic chamber is what we used in Europe. It's an environment that's constructed to block out huge frequency spectrums, and it's
I see.
grounded. The Faraday cage, which is in the Bob Boyce case, is a smaller version of that, not as robust, but it is also grounded, and it's built to block out certain frequency spectrums. And that's why Bob Boyce was using it, because he wanted to make sure that the inventions that he was working on was not having too much RF leakage.
I see. Now, for the other question, for just like an ordinary citizen out there, if they feel like they have these symptoms or are concerned about this, what can they do to get checked or follow up with this to get scanned themselves? Like what can they do about this themselves?
Yeah. If you're suffering from this or you believe that this phenomenon is happening to you, what we do is we coach individuals on what others have done who have been successful, who had these exact symptoms and ultimately led to surgery and having bioimplants being pulled out of them. And so what we do is we do a preliminary RF scan the very same thing that Melinda Kidder was doing,
Mm-hmm.
that Dr. Hall was doing on a sporadic basis. What we've just done is we've fine-tuned the process, and we are now doing clinics across the United States. My focus was initially just to educate the general population about this phenomenon, but I had no idea just how many people still are suffering from this, and we're finding more and more every day. So we wanted a way that we can help more people than just a few. And so we've started a tour. We started in Washington, D.C. during the inauguration. We just finished up in North Carolina. This week, we'll be in Houston. The following week, we're going to be over in Tampa. And that's really going to be the opportunity where a lot of people are going to be able to get scanned, because we're going to be there for many days. And so if you're interested in getting a preliminary RF scan, please go to our website and sign up or send an inquiry.
And what's the website?
And that is www.mind, M-I-N-D, Nexus, N-E-X-U-S, live.com, mindnexuslive.com. And just get on our email list and send an inquiry that you're interested in attending the Tampa clinic.
When's the Tampa clinic, Jesse? It's can you give the dates?
The dates for the Tampa clinic, I believe, are the weekend of the 8th and 9th.
8th and 9th. Yes.
Yeah.
February 8th and 9th. And this is the website right here. And if you scroll back up, Ben, there's it will be where it says services. Click on services, and then there's the scanning there, and also our contact information if you wanted to like reach out to us, send us an email, or just get on our emailing list.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, yeah. So anybody watching this can view this. And what's the dates that you said?
So if you go back, if you go back to just click down services, go to RF testing, scroll all the way down. It's going to be the next one. I'm sorry, the next one over. Go to services.
Oh yeah, and then
RF pricing, and then scroll all the way down. And then that's the schedule.
Okay, there we go. So yeah, January, you were in DC.
February,
And then February you'll be in Texas, Tampa, and then Ontario, Texas as well.
San Antonio, Texas again.
San Antonio. Sorry, I missed the second part.
Yeah. So but Cypress, Texas is basically the Houston area. So if you're in the Houston area, you're close enough to attend one of those scannings and just reach out quickly. Because I'm on a plane in 2 days. Yeah.
Yeah, and Jesse, can you go a little bit in more detail on what the scanning is and for our audience?
Yeah. So what we utilize is an RF detector. It's called the JM20 Pro, and that'll test to see if there's any frequencies around your person. And I want everyone to understand, these aren't just random areas that are popping up positive. These are very specific focal areas around the human person. You can literally take those who are having the AHIs or Havana Syndrome type symptoms or claim that they are, superimpose them over each other, and they're exactly the same. Then there's the military group who come up positive. You can take their scans, superimpose them over each other, and they line up exactly the same. And then there's another group, those who have been incarcerated. You can line them up. They're slightly different, and they line up exactly the same. There's very little deviation. And when there is deviation, it's because they've had some type of surgery or medical procedure. Now, I don't want anyone to think that the medical community is knowingly doing this. But if you were to Google what percentage of our medicines are made out in the United States, I think you'd be shocked. It's actually 95%. And that is a national security issue that needs to be fixed ASAP. So we use the JM20 Pro to test for a frequency emission around your person. And we'll tag that. And then we'll come back with an ASECO, which is a frequency counter. It's a device that'll we use a wand, and it'll give us the exact frequency in that area that we detected a positive RF. We also use spectrum analyzers so that we can get baselines on whatever frequencies are in those environments. And then we'll have the person walk into the environment to see if there's any changes. And if there is, we'll have them walk back out so that we can prove that there's a correlation between them being in the environment and them being extricated from the environment. So it's all videotaped, and we do a report to substantiate the results of the testing. And then we'll coach you on what others have done that have been successful in getting implants removed.
Wow. Yeah, that would be my next question. It's like if people are positive or confirm that they have one of these inside of them, is there a process to get these removed? Can they get
Yeah.
them removed?
Yeah, so I want to be really careful about what we say.
Okay.
Just because you come up positive on an RF scan, you can't say that you have implants. And I
I see.
preface this wholeheartedly because what individuals have been doing has been saying, oh, I came up positive on an RF scan, that means I have an implant. You can't do that because you're going to get one shot at this. And if you're going to go all the way and fight this, you need to make sure you're bulletproof. So once you get an RF scan, you can only attest to what the equipment is designed to do. It's only designed to test for frequency emissions. So we can say that there are positive frequency emissions. Then you go to the nonlinear junction scan, which is a secondary scan, and you have an independent tester, another independent tester. And if they test you on that and you come up with overlapping results, that's significant. Those who have been in this the longest, those have a better chance of utilizing traditional medicine with imagery like MRI scans, X-rays, ultrasounds, CT scans, those type of assessments, and see if there's a correlation in the areas that you come up positive. But because you now see that we're now in the nano size, and nano size is 1/1,000,000th of a millimeter, you're not going to see this through traditional medicine. The only way to see these, detect these things is through technology. And this is why we say that medicine is not taught about this. So therefore, you're going to have to use a different modality to help you prove that this is happening. And this is why that head doctor of that 3-letter agency called me. He said to me, he says, Jesse, there's significant overlap, which means that the symptoms are lining up. But the reason he said he contacted me is because we're pulling out implants. And I said to him, you know, I was just wanting to offer hopefully a solution because I know this is outside the scope of medicine. And I'm not sure if they've even thought about doing this for his patients. But I said, if I could offer any help, and that's all I'm looking for. Because he thought that Dr. Hall and I were looking for recognition, and that's not what we are. We're doing this truly to sincerely get out there and help people. And we want to engage the general population because the community that has been suffering from this in the civilian basis really has been under their own umbrella. And they have been shunned, they've been blacklisted, they've been labeled as tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists, just basically railroaded and smeared, not only in media, but in just in general as being people who need to be medicated. And so I have this overwhelming question. How many people in the mental health industry have been misdiagnosed? And because of the arrogance in the mental health industry, what is the liability there? So there has to be a meeting where we break bread. It's okay to admit you're wrong, but it's not okay to victimize people. And this is our effort. And we're on a mission. And we have some great things that are on the horizons. And I don't know if I should even talk about that, Deserie, but that's up to you if you think I should or shouldn't. But we are on a campaign to globally educate the population about this topic.
Very cool.
All
Very
right.
cool. Um, yeah, I'm definitely looking forward for all of that as well. Um, question I have, so like, is anybody doing anything about this within the government? Like, for example, the Department of Homeland Security, have they said anything about this phenomenon, or even people's symptoms of these things, or even acknowledge anything?
Well, they acknowledge it's happening to federal employees only. But
Hmm.
now, when we were doing our initial study back in the early, 2012 to 15, um, we were doing that without the label of AHI or Havana syndrome. It didn't exist then. Now it is happening. We know that they're acknowledging that it is happening to federal employees who have been diagnosed with Havana syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm excited about is now there are civilians who are being diagnosed with Havana syndrome. And when we were on the East Coast, I can tell you so far, now this is preliminary, so far, 100% of those individuals who have been diagnosed, those civilians who have been diagnosed with Havana syndrome, have come up positive on a preliminary RF scan.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So that's exciting. So we
Yeah.
encourage the
Big.
population to please come out. If you want to get scanned and you can, you have the resources to do it, particularly if you've been diagnosed with Havana syndrome, we want to see you. It's so important.
Right. Okay, Jesse, I think we should wrap it up unless you guys have anything else you guys want to say.
Um, I guess one final question, Jesse. What's like your drive in this? Why have you dedicated your life to get this information out there and to alert people of what's going on?
Well, that's a good question. This is personal to me. Um, Back when I was the field supervisor, operation manager at night for the private ambulance companies, back in the early 90s. And I was training another supervisor out in the field. And a call came over the radio for a high speed pursuit. And my intuition told me that something unusual was going to happen with this high speed pursuit. So I advised them, let's go head over to the area. And law enforcement ended up stopping this gentleman. And it happened to be a father and his 4-year-old girl in the back seat. This was a custody issue. He just wanted to see his daughter. What ended up happening is law enforcement ended up dragging him out of the car, beat the crap out of him, and killed him in front of my eyes. And then one of the officers came to me and said, that guy needs your help. So asked us to resuscitate him. I ended up starting the IV, and I can remember to this day, it'll never leave me, the fear in that little girl's eyes looking in that back seat. But that's when this story began. I tried to report it, and I was told to keep my mouth shut or I'd be killed, and the company would be blacklisted. I was a young man, wife, newly married, wife was pregnant, my first child. And it came back to haunt me. Back then, I wish it would have followed through, but it came back to haunt me because law enforcement caught wind that I was talking about this incident. And as you all know, there's no statute of limitations on murder. But this happened to me. I was in a dental office for just a routine checkup, and I was knocked out. And I awoke drowning in my saliva many hours later. But when I left, I started to have this phenomena. And I knew as a paramedic, if I were to go and complain about the symptoms back then, it wouldn't have fared too well for me. So I decided to go on this campaign of evidence gathering, and this is how we're here today.
Wow.
Incredible.
Thanks for sharing that, Jesse.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think I think your work's going to definitely pay off, and I mean, there's so many people that I believe you're going to be helping through all of this and have helped as well. So, I thank you for what you're doing and being brave to come out to tell the world the truth.
Yeah. Thank you,
I have
Jesse.
no choice. Yeah, there's no choice in this matter. This is about our children, our children's children, our great grandchildren. This is about your lineage, your genealogy. Um, and this is ultimately about whether you decide to stay free as a human species, or do you want to become a complete slave to the system? And that's what we're facing and fighting.
Right. It's like transhumanism that they're pushing.
Yeah.
What this
Mhm.
is. Well, okay. Well, did you want to add anything else, anybody? No?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Please visit our website. Again, that's www.mindnexuslive.com. And I'll also put that in the description. And thank you so much, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you so much,
Bye now.
Jesse. Thanks for being here. It was great. Great
Okay.
interview. Thank you.
You're welcome. Stay strong.